Anyway, please.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Rob Pegoraro. I'm a freelance tech journalist based out of Washington, D.C. And I've been given the task of leading a panel that's going to convince you all to be optimistic about technology, which, given that headlines just in the last week, a badly coded, poorly distributed app apparently caused the entire Iowa Democratic Caucus to melt down. Just read today there's a huge vulnerability in Android Bluetooth that affects all versions up to Android 10, which most people don't actually have on their phones. And apparently there's some huge 139,000 person strong anti-vaxxer group on Facebook giving out horrible medical advice, causing little kids to die. So I'm tempted to make our first question. Yeah, what did we do to piss off the organizers to get stuck with this assignment? But persist we must. So why don't y'all start, introduce yourselves, and then I'll let one at a time each of you make your case for being optimistic about technology's potential in your field. And we'll see if we can sell this crowd or not.
Should I go next? Okay.
Technology is so great, we can't find the mic.
First of all, thank you. And, I'm Vijay Modi with Columbia University, work at the intersection of mechanical engineering, data, some AI. But today I was going to talk about my work in sub-Saharan Africa. So should I just first introduce and then?
Let's have everyone introduce, and then we can.
Yeah.
Eric Horvitz, I'm Director of Microsoft Research with labs across the world. I'm also the founding chair of the Partnership on AI, a multi-stakeholder nonprofit, and have a variety of other hats that I wear, but all sort of on the same theme of artificial intelligence in the open world.
I'm Brian Selander, and I was really optimistic about technology until I had to get from 125th Street. And Google was convinced that this was going to take 27 minutes by foot because they said I had to walk 4 blocks to the subway, wait 17 minutes for the next subway to take me 4 blocks south to get off the subway and then come here. And I said, well, I am optimistic that that app even exists and pessimistic about its implementation. I think you can hold both of those things simultaneously. I'm Brian Selander. I've built a couple fun companies. I've worked for some senior roles at the federal and state level, and on the board of this international nonprofit that takes some of the best young leaders in the world at 15 and 16 years old and helps get them very excited about working with each other. So I think I'm here on those buckets.
I also have a couple of buckets. My name is Peter. I have an app called CoverUS that I co-founded, which helps people protect and profit from their health data to pay for preventative care. It's not a health tech app, it's a financial inclusion app. We are very early stage, and part of the pain that we're trying to solve leads me to my day job. My day job to provide health insurance for my family is at meetup.com, which is a social network that doesn't sell data, serve propaganda, and actually gets people off of technology to connect in community in real life. So those are the hats I'll represent today.
Okay, so let's bring the case for optimism. Vijay, I know you're not optimistic about air travel based on your very long day of travel yesterday. What does have you feeling a little more cheery about tech's prospects?
So, as an engineer, I'm unable by design to be abstract and high level, so I have to give some examples. And so when I first, about 15 years ago, took a sabbatical and traveled for 6 months to many countries, Ghana, Ethiopia, Uganda, Mali, I decided, I came from an engineering, energy, electricity skill, and I remember sort of having multiple meetings in Uganda with the community. I said, we should listen first, And in all the meetings when we sort of said, people who introduced me said Vijay can sort of help you think about electricity a little bit. But the women in the meeting would come in later and say, but if you're an engineer, our first priority is actually drinking water. Because they were on the top of the ridge at 1,800 meters, walking down to 1,400 meters, 1,500 meters every day to literally bring water bucket by bucket. And I think there was a lesson there that first, for me, and I'll come to technology next, is listen to the people you're trying to help. I completely put aside what I was supposed to do, or what I had thought I had a skill for, and focused on water. And that earned me the trust of the community. And that word trust is important, right? So you are coming as a technologist, but that trust was important. Then, by the way, and so I'll point out to a common challenge. Then we worked on electricity. And then we talked a lot, and the funniest part, they told me the 3 or 4 important things. One is they said, we want electricity whenever we want, 24/7, in the amount that we want. Sometimes we may use less. 1 month we don't have money. And we only want to pay for what we use, and we want to pay it in little bit of money at a time. But the most important thing, it turned out to them, was we want a transparent accounting and management system for payment. See, I'd never thought about that. So that led me to this whole work on how to make low transaction cost payments in a setting where you don't have the cloud, so to speak, you don't have blockchain, and yet people want to pay a nickel or a dime for electricity at a time. And we made it work. And these were the first kind of pay-as-you-go digital microgrids, which also then maintained batteries and charging, discharging very well, and so on. So it served both the maintenance purpose and, importantly, an operation, of course, but also a payment system, and I think I want to come to that, because payment systems, at that time, a lot of innovation had occurred by telecom, because there were no sort of, thankfully, Apple Pay and Visa cards yet. So we had to create, and I feel I'll come back to it in maybe Q&A, but a public transaction system which is separate from the private telecom industry could be very useful. And then I'm going to sort of end by saying what I'm focusing on now, many years later, is that what is the eventually working with these communities, the biggest challenge is, of course, income. And what is their competitive advantage? It is land, water. 60 to 70% of people are engaged in agriculture, livestock. This is where the advantage is. Yet, AI focuses on sort of e-commerce and eyeballs and eardrums and all that. So we are trying to figure out how to help use AI through use of imagery. This is not for facial recognition. We are even, if we can recognize a face, we can recognize the presence of a cow. Maybe we'll come to the feeling and face of a cow years later. But, we want to be able to understand livestock density. Is there, cropping potential? What's the management practice? A hard problem, can we estimate shallow groundwater using? But the greatest challenge we are running into, which the AI people here have solved, nobody has ground truth or data to train things on. Whereas here, there's billions of photographs probably that somebody has to train their models on, right? So I think we are focusing on the painful task of how to build up public data, but not on individuals, not on faces, but about the landscape, about water, about livestock, that can then help them create precious little investments and use these underutilized assets. In the process, help the government even know that you have a massive pocket here that could be growing onions, and you are importing onions and so on, and it's like a very high value crop, but you need to also provide power and maybe a road access, etc. So that's my optimism. I want to end by some of the challenges, and we are all men on this panel, so hopefully the women will, will correct us in the Q&A on the.
That's against Microsoft policy. Probably should go back and sit down.
With the past panel, we're at an okay average for the conference today.
So we are trying to, so I
Please,
think,
nobody should tweet this. I get in big trouble on my home base. I feel bad too.
The guys in laser shot, right?
Well, typically we all present as men.
but I think, so I'll end by some of the issues that actually we are facing the most, and I think Barbara on the previous panel raised some of those issues. There's actually, even in, let's say, Uganda and Ethiopia, where I was for the last week, there is an EI brain drain occurring, not even across countries, but within the countries. And I think we are not able to train people fast enough for the demand for the public side, the greater good side of the need. And I think how can we create that demand? So, we are working with universities in a kind of mutual partnership mode. We want to put as much data and not till the project finishes, but as we gather online. Years ago, we created a platform for whole of Nigeria to keep all their schools, health clinics, and public water pumps online, open and accessible, and it was most used at a decentralized level, even though it was the people at the national level who thought they would use it the most. So sometimes data flows from the bottom to up, but then remained locked up there, doesn't flow back down. So these are, my sort of queries about the techno-optimism. And finally, I think I want to say that in countries where incomes have two less zeros than ours, the cost of technology also has to have two less zeros. And I think that can only occur if it is locally developed and it is lean, it is robust. And I think technologists from outside, including me, have to constantly watch out for that are we bringing our Western perspective onto this and not quash and squash local entrepreneurship, enthusiasm, and youth and all that. So thank you.
All right. Peter, in our conversation over coffee this morning, you were doing a pretty good job of advocating for the techlash, actually. So what has you feeling so chipper now?
So I can go next. So thank you for convening this. I first want to acknowledge the land that we stand on. It wasn't ours. From that time to now, a lot has happened in this location. And so two things I wanted to share was one, just kind of a little bit of my optimism, and then two is a story kind of within a story within a story. Because stories and narratives are a great way to kind of bring hope into a room. For me, we have technology today that can track the externalities in capitalism in ways we never could before, right? And so the true cost of goods sold, in theory, can be reflected in profits and prices and things like that. Now, what we're seeing is that the first mover advantage of new technology are the people in power today. So another thing to acknowledge is the all-male panel, right? A thing that's been hard for me lately to acknowledge is my part of the problem of structural oppression, right? And so I've been an ally my life. I have worked in the frontline service industry and nonprofits and Section 8 housing and found dead bodies, and I've worked in soup kitchens my whole life through the church and the scouts and yada, yada, yada. And I am part of the problem. That is very hard to keep that tension and stay hopeful. I'm also very privileged that I wake up with positive brain chemistry. That is a blessing, and it helps with the hard work that I approach. And so that will bring me back to a story. And so this story actually starts at Civic Hall. I worked for Andrew Shea at Civic Hall and ran partnerships and new programs when I moved to New York from San Francisco. San Francisco, the tech scene looks a little different. The culture there is different. In New York, it is dense, it is diverse, and people are direct. That forces you to walk in other people's shoes. You don't have the luxury of user-centered design, right? What person is living on an island where they don't have multi-stakeholders that are impacted by your decisions? So that is what brought me to move 2 young kids to New York, and I have had sleepless nights and bad health, and it took me 3.5 years to get my mindfulness back. But I am here for a reason. Also in New York, you have people who have the hubris to think they can solve big problems. So if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. And so there's this really interesting tension for that, right? The 2 greatest pieces of civic infrastructure in New York are the CUNY system and the MTA, right? CUNY produces more computer science graduates than any other system in the country. The tech talent pipeline issue is absolutely gaslighting. People are not looking in the right places. They're not connecting to the right communities. And to tie it back to something people in this room know, you need to have inclusive voices at a table so that you actually get the best decisions, right? It's not just the right thing to do. Harvard tells us that boards that are diverse outperform, right? Look at the data, people, right? But there are people in power today who like oppressive structural status quo, and I am a part of that problem, even though I'm working against it. And that is a new thing that I'm grappling with. So the story for the optimism. So I met a guy named Ken Miles. Ken Miles is a fellow here at Columbia. He was an entrepreneur in residence and an organizer in residence. We brought him into Civic Hall. I met him at the Fast Company Innovation Festival at Civic Hall, ogling over John Legend, right? He and I have this amazing story. I'm a stepfather, he was a stepson. We connected, it was one of those sparks that happens when you're in the same room as someone with some shared trust and purpose, and guards get broken down and you're vulnerable and you talk to people in a real way. Community is going to be a theme that weaves through this, because that is where hope, I think, is best generated. So Ken and I met, and we stayed in touch. He's, 4th generation community organizer in this very neighborhood, welcoming from everyone from out of town, post offices and community boards and everything in between, right? He and I would do once a month kind of walking tours of the neighborhood. I had ulterior motives of moving my family from the Upper West Side up here because rent is too damn high. They win elections, it's amazing. Our 5% of election votes, often. So he and I are touring up here, and there's a story here that is a fantastic representation of civic innovation, right? It's called Sheffield Farms in Derry. So at the turn of the 20th century, in the 1900s, there was a milk epidemic in America, right? There was a problem getting healthy milk to babies. People were dying. People were nefariously putting chalk in water to sell to mothers to poison their babies, right? This was a epidemic, pandemic, I don't know the definitions, I never went to grad school, but it was a real deal problem, right? And this neighborhood up the block in Manhattanville solved this problem. And the way that they did it is how we need to move forward so this whole thing doesn't fail the human experiment. The earth will live on, we may not. Sheffield was at a critical place, right? Milk was poisoning babies. Mothers were up in arms. In communities in this neighborhood, around New York, in wealthier neighborhoods, and around the country. Now, the solution was a factory just up the road. That factory took innovations from the ivory tower of academia and Louis Pasteur and pasteurization. It took innovations in American machinery and mechanics and factory and supply chain. It took community input to understand the gravity of the problem and how straightforward and serious it was, and how simple solutions might be. It took public infrastructure in roads and shipping to connect farmlands across the river to this neighborhood to bottle. It employed local African American people from Harlem in management roles in 1905, 1910, right? All of these things came together, public sector, private sector, ivory tower science advances, local, like how do truck drivers get this into a place so that it doesn't spoil and we don't kill babies? It took public outrage and PR campaigns, right? All of these things came together to historically bring one of the more important pieces of civic innovation to come out of New York, right? Right here. Now, full circle to last night. I was also in community having a lovely meal with Amy Dean here, who you'll hear from later. And we had this interesting concept, right? We all believe, build with, not for, right? How do you actually do that? How do you set logistically your execution of projects to balance stakeholder needs, know that priorities are not always going to be aligned in the same, and come up with a solution that is the right thing at the right time that might be different a year from now, right? And we had this funny thing where we talked about, let's look to the craft beer industry, right? So farm to table is very important. We're all understanding these microgrids and local economies and regionalism, and look at craft beer, right? There are more breweries in and around New York than I think almost ever before, right? even before Prohibition times. There's Long Island City, there's Other Half, there's Peekskill, right? All of these places produce just a certain amount of volume, right? They often choose not to expand because they want to stay local, they want to stay craft, and they have thriving businesses, right? The unit economics work, imagine that, right? And that's a really interesting concept. How do you actually bring community to the table so that everyone has a voice in the decisions we make, amplified and powered and augmented by intelligence, right? Not artificial, not replacing. But how do you respect the fact that these are like interoperable pods, that it's easier to control and to help the community define what the outcomes are that we're going towards? And I think that that is a really interesting concept. How do we actually break down into these interdependent, bubbles that should potentially have stakeholders have a voice, like de Tocqueville said, like, that's an important thing, but it doesn't really work at a large scale. Another interesting thing to tie it back to why I'm here today is our startup CoverUS Health. So CoverUS Health also came out of some really dotted line history, right? The three co-founders, we've all met for 15 years. I started a board for the Natural Resource Defense Council in San Francisco to connect that advocacy organization to technology and future millionaire techies. I used to fly a guy out named Chris Seeley, who was a world famous DJ. Right? He used to play our benefits because we used to do educational events and active events and raise some money, and he would come out and DJ. Around that same time, I was running open innovation at Yahoo, and we did this cool partnership with NASA called Collaborative Laboratory. I worked with a guy named Andrew Hoppin there. He was kind of doing open innovation work, which, by the way, shows us the future is feminine, right? Open innovation is a fact, and it's a different approach to capitalism that's much more cooperative. Like, that's a trend that's not going away, like a lot of the distributed, approaches to delivering value. He and I worked there, and then he went off and seed funded Planet Lab, and then he became the CIO of the New York Senate, did a bunch of open data work, and transparently got a lot of people in trouble and arrested, but he did his job. Obama based his federal open data standards off of the work Andrew did as CIO of the year at the New York State Senate. We all reconnected at Civic Hall, right? It was 10, 15 years later. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at something we're convening, and I'm like, wait, Chris, this world famous DJ, you're running the Institute for New Economic Thinking with George Soros, a think tank. Before that, you were CEO of Housing Works, doing HIV housing and direct service here in New York. I used to work in Section 8 housing. We never put that together. I thought you were a DJ. Andrew had just sold New Civic and had vested and was looking for his next thing, and we literally met over coffee. And I'm like, how do we all, oh my goodness, right? And that's the weird power of hope. And that's what brings me back to kind of my current work at Meetup, which is there's nothing like being in the same meet space as other humans with shared purpose, trust, and maybe a little provocation, because you gotta kind of get uncomfortable to understand these really hairy issues. And so that was a longer story than I intended. But so that's
Breathtaking.
that's me. So thank you guys, and I am hopeful, right? I'm cynical, but also, we got work to do.
Beer does have a history of making people hopeful, so that's certainly true. Brian, what's your pitch for being optimistic about technology's potential?
So the grand scoop of everything, at some point the universe is mathematically going to collapse back in on itself.
That's not what I asked about.
Billions of years before that happens, the billions of years before that happens, our sun will supernova and our solar system will
Dude.
So in some ways that's very liberating from an optimistic standpoint, because it really frees us to say how many quality years of life can we create for as many people as possible. And in that context, I think everything will solve itself, right? I think part of the reason I'm here, I worked in media in the early 90s and built a media company in sort of 2012. I worked for elected officials in the late 90s and early aughts, and then was the chief of governor from sort of 08 to 2012. And I built a company in 03 and built another one recently. And it's been fascinating to be able to take time off. There's a professor at HBS that talks about needing to get off the dance floor. Right? It's really hard to see what's going on the dance floor when you're part of it. But if you can get up into the balcony, you have a much better perspective on what's been happening. And so I think to go from being a journalist and coming back years later and see an article that I might have spent 15 hours to try and research to get a single fact right, to make sure I could get it, to be able to crowdsource my recommendations to people that I trust, and be able to have it read by millions of people or seen by millions of people pretty quickly, is a tremendous step forward in the democratization of information and the ability to fact check. I think being able to build a company This last one, we launched it in 2018. We're doing billions of dollars a month pretty quickly because technology allowed us to be able to do that in a way it hadn't been beforehand. And we're able to tackle subprime lending and corporate raters in the sort of subprime space in a way that lets us scale pretty seamlessly. But I think the biggest piece, since everybody else has got 70,000 citations that you run Microsoft, I will let you speak in greater depth about the corporate world. But in 2001, we were in DC. I just helped this person become a United States Senator, and there was a massive crisis, and we had no idea what was happening. We had no way to find him. We had no way to call each other. The cell phones were shut down. We had no capacity to know what was really happening. And I vividly remember on 9/11 getting off the train, and we were all gathered around a homeless woman with an AM radio outside the Senate office to try and figure out what had happened. Your friends at the Wall Street Journal were there with, at the Washington Post were there with us. There was a reporter from USA Today, and we were all gathered around this bench on this AM radio trying to figure out what exactly was going on and who was trying to attack us and how that day in Washington, D.C., and it was impossible to be connected to anybody. So fast forward a number of years, and I'm in the command bunker during Hurricane Sandy. And this is where you can draw the line between optimism and pessimism in a real way. So we're in the bunker. We've got tremendous advances in the data because technology has given us much greater insight into where the hurricane's hitting, who's at risk, why are they at risk, what are the evacuation plans that we should be able to move people out of. If you are stuck and you text us or tweet us or let us know that you're there so that we can get you out in a way we never could have beforehand because actual lives were saved that way. We have the ability, because of technology, to have high-definition insight into every aspect of our state to know what was happening. And I thought it was a very optimistic experience and a very pessimistic scenario to know that because of advances in technology over those years, we were better armed. But here's where we get stuck. I got a call from a reporter that said, Brian, the bridge has collapsed over the St. George's River. The St. George's Bridge has collapsed. Why aren't you telling us the St. George's Bridge has collapsed? And I am terrified at this point because I didn't know the St. George's Bridge had collapsed. So, yeah, hold on, Chris. So I put down the phone, walk away. I'm like, General, it's always weird that generals are asking me as an English major what I thought about things during an emergency. But, General, we're going to report that the St. George's Bridge has collapsed over the canal. And he's like, Ron, I don't know anything about that. So I get back on the phone with the reporter, and he's insistent at this point. The St. George's Bridge has collapsed, and you are hiding it. And I have the ability now, because of technology, to hold you accountable for the fact that you were lying. And it turned out that somebody had created a fake picture of the bridge collapsing, had tweeted it out, and the reporter decided to take that as fact.
Was this reporter a 20-something white dude, by any chance?
Well, yes. No, very something white dude. But anyway, but so convinced that this had happened. So our focus, though, then became, oh my God, what a terrible scenario that reporters are allowed to sort of waste moments of our time that way by being able to take the negative of this technology and really drive the loss of it. And it's super easy with my fury at him for wasting my time and making me look like a fool and the generals being terrified and us thinking that we have to evacuate people, right? It's so easy to be microscopically targeted on that anger and the misuse of that technology and miss the broader fact that in Delaware, nobody died from that hurricane. And that everyone was evacuated safely, and that people that were stuck were able to let us know that we needed to get there to get them out. So I do think it's sometimes easy to lose sight of that. And I think this group, the Hugh O'Brien Youth Foundation that we run, my favorite part of the summit, by the way, has been Eric and Linda's grandchild. So I think she's running around, she's grabbing water, she listens, she doesn't listen, she finds things interesting, she doesn't find things interesting. And I think if we don't remember that that's who this entire summit is really about, right? What world are we building for Eric and Linda's grandchild? Then we've lost sight of that our success, despite the impending collapse of the universe trillions of years from now, that our work together should be measured in generations. You mentioned how pessimistic you were about a certain number of things. I think I can tick some of them off. Yes, it's horrifying that there's a Facebook group full of anti-vaxxer moms that's 150,000 strong. It's also great that there's millions of people that are now aware that anti-vaxxing is the thing and can hold them more accountable to it. And that we can use the expectation of that anti-vaxxer mom group to try and educate people across the rest of the world that it's important. I think it's horrifying that there's an Android flaw that has exposed a lot of us. But I think it's really amazing that people all over the world have access to most of human history in their pocket now because Android exists. And I think it's terrible that the Iowa caucus app failed, but I think it's great proof that former politicos like me need to learn to get out of the way and let people that actually know how to build technology. And I think we also have the capacity to be more skeptical about those in power in a way we never have before. And I think the technology has also allowed those of us that come from, I had a really racist high school principal, and I got her fired by getting my friend elected to the school board at 18. And it took a whole lot of work, and we knocked on doors. She's the youngest black official in the country, and we fired our principal, but it took like months of time to be able to do it. Now I've got friends that are 18, 19 years old. They want to run for things. We can get them funded all over the country. And they can hold people accountable all over the world because technology gives them the platform to do that. So there's really this incredible democratization of information, the incredible empowerment of commerce to be able to build multi-million-dollar companies within weeks, and the capacity of these like young people we work with at the Hugh O'Brien Youth Foundation. You mentioned Uganda. I think we also get really micro in our, my story about, oh my God, how silly is it that I couldn't walk a bunch of blocks without them telling me to use the subway, misses the fact that there's 7 billion people whose lives will be forever changed because of the advances that technology is going to help them make in water and food and financial security.
And now it's time for the big tech representative. We all hate that term, don't we?
I didn't know that was my role today, but I'll take it on.
Sorry.
So I'm actually personally, I'll speak just for a human being right now, Eric, optimistic about the influences of technical advances and innovations on people and society. There's great evidence throughout the history of humanity about our incredible ability to leverage technology in beneficial ways. I mean, look around us right now. We're just Homo sapien primates. Look what we've done around us here, and the civilization that we built. It's technical innovation. Language is a technical innovation that we use daily to communicate and collaborate. I think we have to continue to come to terms with rough edges, poor understandings of outcomes as technology interacts in the open world with complexities of society. The recent discussions, Techlash, the reflection going on about computing technology, AI, to me is all such a healthy sign that we have an active, ongoing deliberation and reflection. It's probably more intense than it's been in the past without technical advances. It's very, very healthy, and it's good to see. Now, my guess is that experts in the 1950s, if they were asked to look into the future and imagine what would be, and then they could sort of get a picture, a little snapshot of what's going on today in 2020, they would be most shocked, most deeply shocked, and largely delighted by the influences of what I would call the computational revolution that's happened starting around a few years right before then, and it's continuing now. That revolution is built on the incredible and unexpected leaps in our ability to store data, to the power of computing and the connectivity that came through actually the computing world. Deep and broad influences on society, largely beneficial. And I think it's hard to argue with that. Now, we're now at the inflection point of a set of technologies, it's not a single thing, it's not a blue-green gas, but it's a constellation of technologies called artificial intelligence. And different types of these technologies are edging into the realm of what I would call the realm of human intellect. So taking on tasks that have been, in many ways, the sole focus or have been relied on the responsibility of human beings to make decisions in the past. And that's an interesting change, and it's a great opportunity, and wondrous possibilities come out of what's happening with AI. But along with this comes interesting and hard and unexpected challenges, including what I would call inadvertent challenges, malevolent uses, large-scale, subtle influences on society that we need to keep track of and work hard over time, including the prospect that these technologies will shift the nature of work, distribution of wealth, how resources are allocated potentially in unfair ways, even impinging on notions of human rights and physical safety and so on. So these are really important concerns we need to sort of get right, and we have the rise, what I would call, of an invisible college of expertise now to these challenges. Some great scholarship, as well as principles and activities in the open world going on in this space. I wanted to move on to now why I am using a phrase in the conference brochure, why I'm a techno-optimist when it comes to the computational revolution in general, and specifically to the coming revolution in computational intelligence. And I think it's a revolution now we're only first seeing the early stages of. This is the glimmers of the rise of this revolution. And I've seen incredible promise in my own research and our teams over the last 3 decades of my work in this field. And I thought I'd just give just a few examples from healthcare. It's one place where, again, we're just seeing the scratching of the surface by a couple of technologies from AI, pattern recognition and some natural language analysis and processing. But I mentioned the 2 or 3 examples to give you a sense for why I'm optimistic about this. And these are just initial applications and outcomes we're seeing. So working with colleagues not too far from here, New York Presbyterian Hospital, we kicked the project about 7 years ago right down the street from here. We've been building systems that take lots of data and build predictive models that can identify patients at the highest risk of readmission when they're ready to be discharged. Now, it turns out that avoidable readmissions are estimated to be about a $20 billion charge. It's also not very good for healthcare. Think about the health of patients that have to be readmitted. If you can actually selectively allocate resources to supporting patients who are most likely to be readmitted, you can increase the quality of healthcare and reduce the costs at the same time, because a readmission is very expensive, and keeping patients out of the hospital is less expensive if you knew which patients to focus on. Those systems have been deployed. We also did a similar deployment as a research team working with the MedStar group down in Washington, D.C. It's fabulous to see these systems, and they're not, I would say, deep applications of AI. They're modest applications. You see the big impact. Another application was predict which patients who are hospitalized may become infected with a hospital-associated infection. 1 in 20 patients become infected in hospitals with one of these infections. It's a top contributor, the top 10 contributors to death in itself in the United States. And it comes with a $20 billion estimated price tag, managing these infections. Turns out now we have a good signal. We can predict in advance which patients are maximal risk. We take measures like antimicrobial stewardship, as we call it, to minimize the prospect of those patients getting sick. Another third example, we just have a paper under submission right now on this topic. The latest estimate was that about 250,000 patients per year in the US alone are dying in hospitals because of avoidable medical error. It's estimated to be the third cause of death in the United States after heart disease and cancer. That's almost 1,000 people per day, right? So in this research that we did with a large database from the University of Washington Hospital, people who were elective patients, they weren't very sick, they decided on a procedure. Who are the patients that died in the hospital and why? There's an interesting phrase being used in medicine starting in the late 90s called failure to rescue. Why in this patient who died was there a failure to rescue that patient? It turns out that experts, even fabulous expert physicians and physician teams, have blind spots and biases in their cognition. We showed in this work how a computing system with lots of data to see some of these rare cases, but when you sum them out, it's quite a few across the nation and world, could see in advance patients who were going to crash in advance and could alert teams that this might be the case, things that might surprise doctors. Now, I can tell stories like this, and I have them from my own experience and my colleagues' experience in many other areas. More effective education, safer transportation, precision agriculture, and new directions with sustainability. One of my favorite areas is applications of AI in the sciences. There's going to be such incredible power and sets of tools coming to be with technologies that supercharge how we do scientific investigation, how we formulate hypotheses, how we check them, how we reason about causal influences, come up with foundational mechanisms. We can't do that alone. Now, computers have been helping us for a long time with these technologies, with these challenges. However, computing technologies in the realm of artificial intelligence will take us to the next level with the ability to do science. Now, let me end by just saying that with the hopeful notion that, from many of you, I think here, that I don't see the big payoffs in AI as being in automation. I see these big payoffs as coming to the fore with technologies that understand human beings deeply, that understand their wishes and goals and preferences, that understand their capabilities and their limitations, and that are deployed in ways that augment and nurture and help and empower people to achieve their goals and teams' goals over time. I'm so excited about not just sort of maybe I would call general approaches to doing this, but applying the power of artificial intelligence to figuring this out, to giving systems the ability and the insights as to how to work in a mix of initiatives of human beings in a fluid way at times to help empower them to achieve their goals. And we just have, you can read about our team's work in this space where one direction is applying machine learning to learn about human capabilities and human achievements and human abilities to solve problems, and figuring out how do we sort of mesh humans and machines together in a way to empower people. It's a really fabulous direction. So I have to say that I do think that we have to be careful and deliberate in these techniques and technologies. I'm hopeful and optimistic that we will handle the rough edges over time, but humanity can benefit in deep ways and see unprecedented leaps forward. I want to be really optimistic today on this panel when it comes to health, well-being, sustainability, and empowerment through these technologies.
Well, for what it's worth, I'm optimistic about a few things. Clean power, solar power, wind power is getting cheaper faster than anybody predicted. Really interesting things are happening with commercial space travel. That's why I wore my astronaut socks. Change can happen. I live in the Commonwealth of Virginia, so since January we've had the novel pleasure of a General Assembly that is no longer a place where good ideas go to die. That's been kind of nice. And, you know, last year the Washington Nationals won the World Series, so good things can be possible even if you start off winning 19 games and losing 31. But earlier panels today and yesterday raised some concerns about issues of privacy and power and inequality. So I think we have to sort of go one by one. What are you all personally doing in your work to address these concerns? Let's go with privacy first.
I may jump in as I neglected to talk about CoverUS in my rant about Sheffield Farms, which is important to know. So at CoverUS, what's interesting, we would really complement some of the things that Eric shared around the healthcare work that Microsoft is doing. As I mentioned, CoverUS is a financial inclusion app. It's not a health tech app. And what we do is act as a proxy for our end users to connect with us. You can wire up your Fitbit, your payment history through Stripe. You can answer surveys. You can basically create a superset of data, and with your consent, provide partners with access to subsets of that data, right? And so basically you have an app on your phone, you wire up a bunch of things, and then we present you with offers. And so you might want to, for me, Alzheimer's runs in my family, and so if NYU Langone is doing research on Alzheimer's, they can have all the data they want, right? They can have a complete picture of me. Because I trust NYU Langone, it's something that hits close to home, and I can actually pay for preventative care or the child care I need to get to my appointment or the Uber ride to get there, right? Whatever I might need that money for, we believe communities know best where to spend that capital. But if Pfizer comes knocking, right, I might have a little different relationship, right? I might actually get more money from Pfizer than NYU Langone, but I'm a little skeptical, right? And so I will pick a template, potentially recommended by someone in my community, to only share certain information with Pfizer I feel comfortable with to get paid. Now, this is complicated, right? Trying to understand where my data is, who needs it, for what purpose, what's the value exchange going to be, what's the risk associated. It's not something most Americans, especially today, have the time or breathing room to navigate. You know, I'm a well-educated person, and I still have had to make decisions with my employment and for my family's safety that go against my rational self-interest because of the system, right? It's hard to know which insurance to pick and how much it's going to cost and what's the budget, right? Now, we really anchor on trust, and it's something the first speaker said, right? Data is the new oil, I think, is wrong for so many reasons, right? Oil is not a renewable resource. It pollutes the environment. It's the old industrial complex, not the new clean energy future. So like data is the new oil, I think, is a hard thing for me to not get triggered by. But trust is the new currency, right? And how do you actually make something accessible? It's not a privacy policy. It's a data usage policy. So at CoverUS, we have what we call the respect framework. The respect framework promises to be completely transparent, but actually accessible. So that all of our surveys, everything is big letters for those who may not be able-bodied to read tiny print, right? And it's meant to be that trusted proxy. We just finished a trial with 400 people who suffer from irritable bowel syndrome, and it was really fascinating. We picked IBS because my co-founder Chris suffers from it severely, and what we like is that the data is actionable and valuable on both sides of the aisle, both for clinical research and for everyday e-commerce decisions. Right?
So we should privacy. Have you checked with your colleague? Did you share this with the world?
Yes.
Video cameras?
He's been public with it before, so this is. So basically, we're able to take advantage of the pipes of e-commerce that have been built today, right? The weapons of mass persuasion that are being used against propaganda. We're supposed to sell us Nikes, right? If you have IBS, you may want to buy, you know, fresh fruits and vegetables, gym memberships, other things, right? And so there's a whole, we can get, you know, return value back to our users by using their data, connect them with everyday e-commerce offers in pursuit of health. On the other side, it's a clinical condition that's affecting more and more people around the world, and it's highly valuable there. But they don't have time to sift through all this stuff. And so in our feedback, 80% or 85% of the people trust CoverUS completely with a superset of their data just to kind of set it and forget it and let us go with it, right? We are not a deep tech team. We're a civic tech team. And so we have people on our board who were the chairwoman of Planned Parenthood globally, right? We would like to go to market with a civic partner who has the community relationships and a different currency of trust in our technical layer of reg tech and kind of open data trust, right? Because it's something of value to their community. And so we leverage and complement a lot of the deeper tech on this panel, but really we're that last mile, and it's not enough to make it open. It has to be accessible, actionable, and let people sift through the noise to take the small steps to be healthy.
So I'll just be very brief about this.
Sure.
We've been sloppy and too accepting as both IT companies and as consumers and enterprises in sharing data. There's no reason companies should be scarfing down everything you're doing. They should be, one of my personal viewpoints is, given a task, we can be minimally invasive and collect data for specific tasks, for example, to enhance how we personalize someone's service when it comes to search engine, for example, but not in general describe everything. And we need to really focus on technologies that I call minimally invasive sensing and data collection with notice and consent. We have AI technologies can aim directly at minimizing data needs. We publish quite a bit in this space. And this is even above and beyond encryption methods. We have families of encryption methods now that can learn from populations without ever incurring on personal privacy. Other kinds of methods that do sampling over large populations without personal data being shared. So the tech community, both academia and industry, can do a lot better with advocating existing innovations and transferring them into reality.
Vijay.
Okay, so I think there are very special issues around health. I think Peter brought out. But I think I want to make sure the bigger message around technology and privacy. I think the poor definitely need every tool in the kit to come out of poverty. So I think I don't want to forget that. You know, they may not be able to reach, you know, the stage of building like a Boeing 737 MAX in 10 years, right? That's further away for them, right? What they can do in the short term is use local information. You know, we are helping put stereo cameras on a bicycle with stereo cameras borrowed from a toy that Microsoft built because it was built at scale and cheap, and modifying it to detect landscape and image processing, but all very local, right? And I think, ironically, in many of the countries I work, the populations have a really healthy mistrust of the government. And that healthy mistrust, combined with sort of the digitization and democratization that solar brought and all that, is allowing them to be a little bit bottom up when it comes to data, privacy, and yet achieve scale by only working at a little bit from community to national level through either private companies or government. And I think that kind of leapfrogging, you know, that makes this glue, so to speak, possible is things like IoT, things like remote sensing, things like low-cost sort of detection, sensing, things like software, which I actually think are highly transferable and don't require on a 40-year knowledge base that Boeing may have, or you know, the deep tech sort of hardware tech companies have. So I think that giving a little bit of that impetus. So right now, in the sort of very local, self-managed kind of water and energy systems that we worked with them on, there is a lot of information that is private, but it stays locally. Only the aggregate information goes to the cloud, so to speak.
The federated learning approach Google's been talking up?
Maybe that's what it's called.
Yes.
And, you know, so I think that, and I am, so where the challenge lies is that a lot of innovation is occurring through community scale organizations. I worked with cooperatives and I never thought they would sustain. They are sustaining through, but what can be the lessons learned from them that the government can incorporate into regulation and public infrastructure at the right moment before some giant company sort of takes over and makes it fully their own because they have a huge capital to do so. But I think, you know, my hope is in the fact that people actually are very smart, they have a very healthy knowledge of this, and if we can spread that knowledge along with technology, then I have great hope.
I think there's a mistaken belief that surrendering your personal information is the admission ticket these days to even be part of technology.
Thank you.
I think
How
that,
many people here just click on yes, could be okay, and
yeah.
I don't, but I'm difficult.
You mentioned sort of Stripe and Plaid. It is amazing the sort of information people happily give up without even knowing it's there. We aggressively don't want to know most things about you because we aggressively do not want to have a data hack that exposes anything that we know about you. Technology creates awareness. Awareness can enforce accountability. And I don't believe we've done the best job as a culture yet of making people aware of just how much is at risk because of the surrendering of all of the information they've been given, to be able to hold people accountable for lax enforcement on the other side of that.
My take on data is the new oil is data is the new nuclear waste. It was useful once upon a time. It is kept around for far too long with no clear plan for disposing of it. And so one thing I did, a tiny little thing, was got rid of the Facebook like buttons on my blog, which, number one, I don't think anybody ever used them, and Google says it loads faster on mobile. And so for the tiny number of people who actually visit it, they're not getting tracked that way. So no problem, anytime. I'd like to get some questions from the audience, because the bright ideas here are definitely not only on this side. You there, and then...
This is for you, Vijay, but also the others on the panel. Could comment if you see success as we see it. My company's called Energy Mentors, and we basically organize incubator labs at universities, where the only requirement is that the local entrepreneurs that we help select have to hire or use as interns students from the university. The second requirement is listen to the community to find out what are the requirements. Initially, we thought energy. Like you, we found out in many, many cases in Africa, water is way up at the top. Have you found that skill set of the incubator lab, which has been very successful in the United States and other places, of success in your travels in Africa?
Hugely in Nairobi, for example, in Kenya. It's really growing. I was in Uganda, Ethiopia. It is less so, but the universities are very fired up. We should talk because they are being finally very dynamic. They came out of a very bureaucratic, structured, top-down system. But I think it's all about local talent, and even sort of large international aid organizations and World Bank is realizing the power of that, because that listening cannot happen at scale by me flying there. That listening will have to occur locally. Then they tell us, okay, here's some catalytic input we need from New York. Can you facilitate that? That should be the modality, and I think you are spot on that.
Who is next in the audience with a question? Over there.
As an optimist myself, I'm consistently confronted by people arguing that productive employment is going to be I'm consistently confronted by people who think that productive employability for most people is going to be detrimentally affected by AI. And I'm just wondering if panelists could give me 3 or 4 reasons why they're wrong.
I think you're right, as opposed to saying they're wrong, but that doesn't mean I'm not a techno-optimist, because that kind of disruption has been happening for centuries. The question is, how will we adapt? How fast will it be? Will it be various equilibria, temporary equilibria, stasis points in the balance of things? One of my optimistic views is that, to bounce off the last comments I made, is this complementarity will lead to new kinds of tasks for human beings that really highlight humanity. Stuff we can't do with machines, we never will be able to. Human connection, pedagogy, artistry, and that we'll come to even celebrate those things more in the future with the rise of various kinds of automation. But I do think there will be some interesting times and disruptions. For example, if we snapped our finger and we can have long-haul trucking come to exist, just the long-haul parts of trucking. It's just incredible how, I've been surprised how big a sector of this country, the United States, is truck driving trucks. It's a significant chunk of jobs in our country.
So to build off that, what's interesting too, and a good friend of mine is the CEO of Convoy, which is leading the way in this space. But what a lot of people don't understand is that white-collar jobs are potentially the most at threat, right? You want to talk about training a machine model, you know what the best industries to have a machine model that's already in existence? Law and accounting. You want to talk about simple logic trees around what to do in a situation that a computer can follow? So it's interesting to think of when the disruption occurs with people who today have more power, where policy may shift, right? We talk about taxi drivers and truck drivers, but ICEO is a project from the Institute of the Future. Rita Corbus is here later today. You know, ICEO is an interesting project, right? If anybody should be unbiased, making decisions off of data, right? That is a role that shouldn't be just human passion, right? Because, you know, technology changes and humans don't. So it'll be interesting to see when this disruption comes into other industries. And people also forget, you know, when electricity came to America, and urban America especially, there was blood in the streets, right? World War I kind of got us out of that. But 1890 to 1910, like, there was legit civil unrest and blood in the streets in America, in Chicago, in Boston, and that's, we may be at the early stage of that, but we're on the hopeful panel, so I'll pause there.
I do want to make a point, sorry, just quick point is, for the global south, software and technology is right now an opportunity for jobs. So that's where they are thinking. And because they are poor, they want to think short term. So the fact that technology maybe in the long term may take away jobs is just a distraction. And my hope is if they really do it well, they can eat our lunch. We have been eating their lunch for a long time. So.
Does the AI CEO demand $20 million a year in compensation, $100 million in stock grants, and a private jet?
It depends what profit comes into the company with what environmental effects, because all of that is trackable and can be fed into the ICO algorithm.
Okay.
I have this white collar, blue collar comment. You say that jobs, in quotes these days, involve hundreds or thousands of tasks. Narrow, deep AI, these are little wedges of intellect that can help in different ways. Their availability will shape the nature of tasks or jobs that people do, or constellation of tasks, and then therefore jobs. It might make jobs, might change the definition of jobs that we have today. It also might make jobs a little bit different, hopefully more enjoyable and empowering for people.
Let's take a question from this side, because of course I've been looking this way, so my own blindness has been. Yes, in the back there. Oh.
So you've talked a lot about community and building from the ground up, but how does that scale to the global context and the global society that we live in with this new technology and communication today?
You want me to just say, I think that on energy and water and landscape and food, because it is local, community is essential, but the private sector is trying to scale, and you are right, to even scale to a national level, you need kind of the whole national scale to help as well. But I think the lessons learned from that bottom up, it's important for the public sector to help ensure how those things are made. And I just want to put in a plug. I think our own president, Bollinger, at the university, is saying this fourth purpose of the university, beyond just teaching, research, and so on, is at least facilitating some of this exchange, which is not just tech, but all the other things that go with it, ethics and privacy and all that, that we work with countries in sub-Saharan Africa to the extent we have links to really help catalyze this.
For me, open source is a huge part of this solution, right? And it's not just open source technology. I think it's bigger and more abstract from the public sector.
Couldn't agree more.
It's open source policy, right? So another technology that's vogue now is blockchain and cryptocurrency. I was deep in that space. CoverUS has a future play for that. Our lean startup version of it is just to have a data and usage framework that respects individual sovereignty and consent today, so that in the future when the protocols are ready, we can port our business there, because there's plenty of HIPAA compliant Web 2.0 databases that we should be using today because they're trusted, true, and cheaper to build. One of the things that I loved about being deep in the blockchain space was the Techno-optimism was like Moore's law bigger than social media connecting us all, right? It was hype and fluff and save the world. And when I would start to talk to people about what they call token economics, which what we call is mechanism design and social psychology, that's the fascinating part for me. Blockchain's interesting because of a network of a certain scale, more than half the people won't buy in the same way to corrupt the ledger, right? That's a social psychology truism that makes that emerging technology exciting to me, right? It codifies social relationships and value exchange and actually opting into a marketplace in an indelible way. And so at the end of the day, it comes back to the, technology changes, humans don't. And none of this stuff is hopeful unless we have people who show leadership to make tough decisions, to invite the right people to the table, to hash out these often trade-off filled, paths forward.
You get the last word here, I think, Brian.
So, as word on the panel, or just the question? Okay, so I was telling
I
my
get the
last
last word.
her homework, and she was studying Greek mythology. And as I was taking the training, I thought, we're at this Promethean moment right now. Right? So Zeus takes Prometheus and ties him to a rock where his liver, I believe, is eaten every day for the cardinal sin of giving the technology of fire to humanity. And I think at this moment, if we were sort of to ask Prometheus, he would look at what people have done with technology and say to Zeus, I don't know what you're mad about. They're just using it to set everything on fire and burn themselves.
You mad, bro?
It turned out much worse. I think you can be a technology optimist and recognize that the actual tool itself, the fire in this case, has had profound ramifications that we need to be tackling. And I think you can look at the tool itself of fire and say the destructive power is massive. But I also think you can look at humanity and say we are greater than our capacity to do damage and our capacity to use it to build. And I think you can be optimistic about the ability to harness the fact that we're running around burning ourselves and other things right now, and knowing that the tools we've got at our disposal could create lasting and sustainable change that should make us feel optimistic about that technology going forward.
So while we've been talking, the clouds have literally started to lift. Have we made you more optimistic about technology? Because if we have, I'm sure the next panel will fix that. Thank you all very much.